Hey everybody, so I want to talk about how you will never ever miss a lead follow-up again in your CRM for the rest of your business if you follow this new process. And I actually learned about this through YouTube. There's a YouTube video, or it's called if you just YouTube Smart List Zero. Um, this is what I'm going to talk about. Let me just talk about real quick what I was doing before, and I've had this same problem in every CRM I worked in, right? So you get a lead, you call the lead, you don't get the phone call, they don't pick up the phone. What do? You set a follow-up task, okay, to remind yourself to call the lead another day. So the next day comes by, you may or may not call the lead. Say you forget to call the lead, right? The next day goes by. You have 20 more people to call, plus your past contacts you didn't call. Another day goes by. So basically, tasks get lost first and foremost. Even if you try your best to call all the leads in your task list, sometimes you still can't get to them for whatever reason. And then you have the other problem of forgetting to make tasks. So I've been, I was working in my business for years, just trying to create tasks to remind myself to call leads. And no matter how good you are, and I'm actually pretty good at follow up, I always miss stuff. And then don't even think about the team. They will definitely not be consistent with creating tasks and remembering to follow up with other tasks. So, what's the solution? If tasks don't work, what's the solution? Well, SmartList Zero is the solution. And the basic concept of SmartList Zero is that you're not creating any tasks at all. You're essentially, all you're doing is organizing your contacts in certain lists based off of their motivation. And then those lists, they are dictated by last communication, and whether or not you communicated or not. Okay, so let me give you an example. Um, Say a new lead comes in and you want to call this lead once a day for the first 7 days. You wouldn't create a task every day that you call the lead and don't get them on the phone. What you would do is you would create a set of rules for all new leads that says this lead will show up back in this list if there's been no communication for at least 8 hours or for at least 24 hours. So you call that lead, it'll disappear from the list, but it will show back up in that list if there's been no communication for at least 24 hours. So that way, the leads automatically go in the list based off no communication versus you trying to constantly remind yourself to have communication. And I have my lists here on my screen, my Smart lists. They're to the left here. I have today's leads. I have leads in the last week. I have leads in the last 2 months, leads in the last year, hot, warm, cold, D, past clients, nurture one, nurture two. These are my lead lists that I use for my follow up. And again, the concept is that you call through the list and the goal is to get them to zero. Okay. Once the list is to zero, you've done everything. Let's evaluate the parameters of my today leads here quick. So I'm going to go over to follow up, also go to filters here. So I have stage includes leads. So when a lead comes in, they're always in lead stage. So they're in lead stage until you make communication with them or you decide to put them on like a super long-term nurture plan. But end of the day, you want to have some sort of stage where all new leads go into that you keep them in until you determine what to do with that lead based off a conversation. So it's all leads that are stages lead, then all leads that are also created in the last day. Okay. And then, so then last call is empty. Okay. So these are all leads that have no calls. Okay. That have been created in the last day. So this list is solely for new leads that come in within the last 24 hours. If there's been no communication, they'll just show up in the list until they are called. And again, the idea is to get this list down to nothing. And then you've called all your leads for the day. But keep in mind too, as time goes on, new leads will go in there. So like that lead's always like you're adding, subtracting as you call. Now, I apologize because that probably doesn't actually show you exactly what I'm talking about. This next smart list will. Okay, so leads come in. The whole point of today's leads is just to like have a list of people that came in the last 24 hours. Now, say you call them. Okay, they're not going to be in that today's leads list anymore. What's going to happen is they're going to show up next in the leads in the last week. So if you look at the criteria, stage includes leads. It was created less than 7 days ago. So these are all leads in the last week. And then last call was more than 8 hours ago. Okay, so that means no one has communicated with leads in this list for at least 8 hours. So you call the lead on the first day, it'll pop up in this list 8 hours later, assuming there was no communication. If someone calls on the 10th hour, it won't show back up in that list for another 8 hours. Okay, so you see what I'm saying? How like this allows leads to just funnel back into the list versus you having to click a button, set a task, and remind yourself to call this lead. Okay, so again, all leads that came in the last 7 days will show up in here, and also leads that have not been communicated for at least 8 hours. Now, let's say it's more than a week, they're going to fall into my last 2 months bucket. So these are all leads that were created in the last 60 days. They're still in lead status because we don't know what they're doing. And last call was more than 1 week ago. Okay. So that means, again, like leads will show back up in this list if no communication has happened for at least 1 week. Okay. And it'll keep doing that for 2 months. So if your team constantly brings this list down to zero every single day, this lead will get called once a week for 2 months after the first week. Okay. So again, if you go back to the first day, that's at least one communication on the first day. Okay, at least one. Okay, and then it'll immediately go into this bucket right away because it overlaps with leads in the last day. So it'll show up again in your day list 8 hours later. If you call it again, it'll show up 8 hours later. So basically, on the first day, this lead could potentially show up to call 3 times. Okay, and well, in the first day, it could show up 3 times, and then I guess, it'll stay in that queue for a week, as long as and it'll pop up in the queue every 8 hours. It's not communicated with. So then, okay, so I have a last year list. Let's talk about when you actually get a lead on the phone. Okay, so say I get a lead on the phone, and they tell me they want to buy a house in a month. I'm moving to the hot bucket. Okay. So the hot bucket, and this is actually a very important part of this process. You have to stage the leads. Like if you're not staging them, like that's where this could fail. So lead status is no idea where the lead's at. Hot is leads that want to transact in 0 to 3 months in my CRM. So again, like if I go here, all leads that I put into the hot queue, last communication was more than a week ago. So any leads that are hot, if I have not communicated with them for at least a week, it'll show back up in this bucket. And again, my goal is to get this bucket to zero. So I go through all my lists every day and I get them to zero as much as I possibly can. Warm leads, if they're warm, it pops up if there's been no communication for at least a month. So these are people who are, say, they're 3 to 6 months out. So we're trying to get people who are 3 to 6 months out. We're trying to at least call them once a month. Leads that say they're 6 to 12 months out, we try to call them at least once every 3 months. Okay, so again, if they're in this bucket, they will show back up in the list every if there has not been at least a communication for at least 3 months. And I actually have this for any sort of communication where my leads, it's purely phone, because I want people calling new leads when they come in, because this specifies phone conversations, where this is hot, warms, colds. These are any type of communication, whether it's email, text, phone call. Okay, but anyways, this has allowed me to never forget a lead because I'm completely done with setting tasks. I'm not saying I don't set tasks. I do set tasks, but my task lists now are way smaller than they've ever been. I typically set tasks for unique situations where someone tells me they want me to call them at a certain time, at a certain day, where the smart list doesn't apply. But like this allows you, to actually take more advantage of the tasks that you have to do every day, where you're using those for more like specific off like communications, where the smart lists are for just like long-term nurture, never forget a lead. So anyways, I know it's a lot of information, 10 minutes of talking about this, but if you guys have any questions about this, this has definitely been a game changer. Message me, like, subscribe. I want to keep making videos like this. Thanks a lot. I'll see you.